Let's begin with those who came close to being lucky and work our way towards the luckiest of them all. Number 7. James Marshall. James W. Marshall's story is one of the most fascinating you'll ever hear. It all began in 1848. Marshall, who was a carpenter by trade, was placed in charge of building a sawmill on the American River in California. While performing some of the final tests on the sawmill, Marshall spotted some reflective specks at the bottom of the river. As he reached in and pulled it out, he was shocked to discover gold. Caught up in excitement, he revealed his discovery to a few of his crewmen and the landowner. In disbelief, the men quickly began testing the shiny metal, and after many rigorous tests, they concluded that it was some of the highest quality gold. The next morning, Marshall showed up to work and realized that his crew had gotten smaller. The following day, it had shrunk even more. And after a few days, Marshall was the only one showing up to his shift. Marshall began to speculate that the men had abandoned the sawmill in search of gold, so he began exploring the nearby land. But what he discovered was much, much worse. Hundreds of trespassers were panning along the riverbed, all with the same look in their eyes. The eyes of men who had been infected with gold fever. In the coming months, there were at least 4,000 men on the property mining for gold. James Marshall had unknowingly triggered one of the deadliest and most dangerous eras in history, the California Gold Rush. But even Marshall wasn't lucky enough to dodge the virus. And soon he was on that same riverbed, desperately panning for his share of gold. Marshall spent years on that riverbed, but never struck gold again. And on August 10th of 1885, he died a poor man. Number 6. John Sutter. Perhaps the most shocking story on the list is that of John Sutter. John Sutter was a Swiss immigrant who went on to establish Sutter's Fort in central California. Sutter had received around 49,000 acres of land from the Mexican government in 1841. The goal was to create a self-sufficient city in the hopes that it would attract Swiss and German immigrants to California. With this dream in mind, he quickly began to hire men to build farms, ranches, distilleries, and mills. Years went by, and the possibility of building a city on his acres of land was becoming a reality. But what happened next, no one could have ever predicted. One day, one of his workers was adamant about speaking with him, and once they were face to face, the man opened his hand to show him what he had found. That man was James Marshall. John Sutter instructed Marshall not to tell anyone about his discovery, and almost immediately, Sutter began to purchase more land in the surrounding areas. But buying land took time, and before Sutter could begin to search for his gold, thousands of trespassers and squatters flooded his land. Unable to remove them all, they savagely tore up every inch of his property. You see, just days after Marshall had discovered gold on Sutter's property, a man named Samuel Brannan, who worked at a news publication in San Francisco, began to publicize the discovery. Word quickly spread, and soon over 300,000 people rushed to the state with dreams of striking it rich. In the end, Sutter, a man with high aspirations who tried to do everything by the book, was left with nothing but ravaged land. His livestock stolen, his crops destroyed, and with no one wanting to work on his land, he quickly went broke. Sutter spent the remainder of his life in a legal battle with the government, seeking compensation for his losses. And 32 years after the discovery of gold on his property, on June 16, 1880, Sutter finally won his legal battle and was set to receive $50,000, a value of around $1.4 million today. But just 2 days later, Sutter died. John Sutter Jr. would go on to build the city his father had once dreamed of. The city was built on his father's land and became known as Sacramento. Number 5. George Carmack. This next story is a short one, but it's one that is as old as time. In 1896, a man named George Carmack, along with 2 other men, was fishing for salmon in the Klondike River in Yukon, Canada, a very remote and hard-to-reach area. While fishing, one of the men spotted some nuggets of gold in a creek bed. Upon further inspection, they were stunned to discover even more gold among the rocks. The men quickly staked their claim by setting up ropes that served as boundary lines. In the coming weeks, the men panned for gold along the river, pocketing so much gold that all three men would never have to work again. After the men had more gold than they knew what to do with, news of their findings exploded, and the Great Klondike Gold Rush of 1896 had officially begun. Over 100,000 travelers from around the world flocked to the area in search of fortune. These desperate men, on the verge of insanity, tore up the Klondike and the nearby Yukon River. The gold rush lasted for 3 years. A few men became extremely wealthy, but for the majority, striking it rich was nothing more than a dream. As far as Carmack, he lived a very comfortable life, able to afford anything he could ever want. But even with all his immense wealth, Carmack couldn't escape the deadly and dangerous disease known as gold fever. He became obsessed with finding more gold, and for the next 26 years, Carmack continued to stake claim after claim, hoping to find another gold mine. He desperately wanted to relive the feeling he had experienced on the Klondike River. Carmack searched endlessly in the mountains of Washington, California, and Nevada, but with little to no luck. And in 1922, at the age of 61, George Carmack died while working on a new claim. Number 4. Clarence Berry. One of the most iconic stories of the gold rush has to be that of Clarence Berry. The year is 1896, around 40 years after the California gold rush had ended. A man named Clarence Berry was barely scraping by, working on a fruit farm in Selma, California. Berry was the son of a 49er, a term given to men who came looking for gold during the California gold rush. Growing up, his dad told him stories about men who left their lives behind, traveled to California, and struck it rich. But Berry's dad was just one of hundreds of thousands who came to the state looking for gold and never found it. Berry, who was around 30 years old, never had much money. He managed to save enough to move to Alaska with his wife in 1896, where he settled down and worked as a bartender. One night, a mysterious man walked into the bar, ordered a few pints of beer, and paid with gold nuggets. Berry quickly asked the man where he had found the gold. The man stopped in his tracks and replied, "At the Klondike," and walked out. That mysterious man was none other than George Carmack, one of the first men to discover gold in the Klondike. Placing all his belief on what the man had told him, Berry raced home and told his wife and brother what had happened. In the coming days, the three of them set off on foot to reach the Klondike, but getting there would not be easy. The path to the Klondike was deadly, since it was located in an extremely remote area of Canada. Just to get there, one had to travel up the Chilkoot Pass, an extremely dangerous ice wall. Then came the long and exhausting White Pass Trail, later known as the Dead Horse Trail, due to the thousands of pack animals that died there from exhaustion. Berry, his wife and brother traveled for days, hauling in a year's worth of food, equipment to dig and mine gold, as well as tools to build a shelter. Berry had always envisioned his dad's stories about men who had left everything behind and struck it rich, and now he was fueled by those stories. Once they reached the Klondike, the area was nearly empty, and they thought long and hard about where to stake their claim. Eventually, they settled on an area called Little Rabbit Creek. They built a cabin and began digging for gold, but they found nothing. The frozen dirt only allowed them to dig 6 inches per day, but they continued day in and day out. Weeks would go by, and still nothing. Then, once they reached a depth of around 30 feet, the men struck gold, and lots of it. With every scoop of dirt, hundreds of dollars worth of gold followed. Soon, they had buckets upon buckets filled with gold nuggets. Berry and his brother eventually recruited their 2 other brothers, and soon they began alternating between living at the cabin and digging holes on their claimed land year-round. In no time, they had around $130,000 worth of gold, a value of around $5 million today. Soon after the men had acquired their gold, the news exploded. Large amounts of gold in the Klondike. And soon, around 50,000 men from around the world poured in, decimating the Klondike River and the surrounding land. But as far as the Berry brothers were concerned, they had struck it big and left with their gold just days before the Yukon gold rush began. The Berry brothers went on to invest their money and started an oil company known as the Berry Corporation. Today, that company trades on the New York Stock Exchange, and in 1996, the company sold its 100 millionth oil barrel. Berry and his brothers had done it. They not only became but surpassed all of the men in their father's stories. Number 3. Samuel Brannan. This next story is one of pure luck and ingenuity. At the age of 14, Samuel Brannan began to take an interest in the printer trade. He spent countless years perfecting his craft, and by the age of 27, he had made his way to California in search of a better life, settling in San Francisco. Thanks to his knowledge of working the printer press, he successfully established the California Star, the first newspaper in San Francisco. Using the money he made from selling newspapers, he opened multiple convenience stores in the San Francisco and modern-day Sacramento area. In 1847, while working at his Sacramento store, a few men came in and purchased some pans. But oddly enough, they paid for the pans with gold nuggets. Around this time, Brannan began to hear rumors and whispers of a man who had discovered gold nearby as Sutter's Fort. And since Brannan owned the only convenience store near Sutter's Fort, he quickly began to buy every pan from nearby stores for 20 cents and started selling them for $15 each, a value of around $600 today. But here's where things get even crazier. Brannan was set to make even more money by publishing the first newspaper announcing the discovery of gold at Sutter's Fort. But get this. As soon as his workers saw what was to be printed, they all ran out the door and headed straight to Sutter's Fort. With no one left to print the papers, Brannan began to run down the street, screaming gold, gold, gold at Sutter's Fort, successfully triggering the California gold rush. And in just a couple of months, Brannan made over $36,000, or around $1.5 million in today's value. He used that money to open up even more stores near Sutter's Fort. Brannan was making over $150,000 per month, a value that would be around $6 million today. Samuel Brannan became California's first millionaire, thanks to pure luck, sharp ingenuity, and out-of-the-box thinking. Number 2. John Deason and Richard Oates. It had been 8 years since the Victorian gold rush had ended, yet there were still stragglers in Victoria, Australia who refused to give up mining for gold. John Deason and Richard Oates were two of those stragglers. Like many men from this time period, the two had moved inland in search of gold, away from the rivers which had already been heavily mined. The men were working a claim near an area known as Bulldog Gully, and it was just another day. Like the many days before it, Deason was scraping the surface of the soil with his pickaxe, when suddenly, he heard and felt something unusually hard underneath the soil. What happened next is nothing short of a miracle. Just 1 inch beneath the surface lay a gold nugget. But as Deason went to pick it up, he realized that it was firmly embedded in the soil. So he carefully placed his pickaxe underneath it to break it loose. But as soon as he cranked the handle, the pickaxe immediately snapped. The two men began to swipe away the dirt around the gold nugget, and with every sweep, more gold was revealed. 2 swipes turned to 3, then 4, 5, and so on. A few minutes later, the men were staring at a gold nugget that spanned 2 feet in length with a depth of 1 foot. They didn't know it at the time, but they had just found the largest gold nugget in history. It weighed around 241 pounds. The nugget was so heavy, it had to be cut into 3 pieces just to be carried out. Within days, the gold nugget was sold, and the two men pocketed around 9,400 pounds, a value that would be around $6 million today. Today, the site is marked with a stone monument over the area where the gold nugget was found. Number 1. Kevin Hillier. When it comes to luck alone, there might not be a man or woman more lucky than Kevin Hillier. In 1980, Kevin Hillier had suffered a back injury that required surgery. His doctor advised him to walk as much as possible to ensure a speedy and healthy recovery. At the time, Kevin and his wife were living in an RV in Australia with their kids, and they decided they might as well buy a couple of metal detectors and put them to use if they were going to be walking so much. Being new to the hobby, they weren't very familiar with how the devices worked, but they decided to take them out to a field to learn. Kevin and his wife exited the car and went in opposite directions, but just a few steps from the road where they had parked, Kevin's metal detector gave a faint reading. Not thinking much of it, he figured it was probably a malfunction and decided to keep moving. As he began to walk away, For one reason or another, he changed his mind. During this time, his wife Beth had been searching in a nearby area, but eventually headed toward Kevin to meet up with him. As she worked her way toward him, from a distance, she saw what looked like Kevin on the floor. Thinking the worst, she quickly ran to him to see what was wrong. And as she got closer, she saw Kevin shaking, with tears running down his face. Next to him lay a small hole in the ground, and inside, the largest gold nugget she had ever seen. As they both began to frantically dig the nugget out, its size just grew and grew. It seemed to have no end. After some time, the couple were staring at a gold nugget that spanned over 18 inches in length and weighed 61 pounds, making it the second largest nugget of gold ever discovered. But it gets even better. The nugget was 99% pure gold, an extremely rare level of purity. Kevin and Beth were in such shock after discovering the nugget that they rushed back to their RV and placed it underneath their bed, sleeping on top of it for the next few days until they finally figured out what to do with it. They settled that the best way to sell it was through an auction, where it was quickly sold to a Las Vegas casino for $1 million, a value of around $4 million today. The sale drastically changed Kevin and his family's life forever, as they became millionaires in the blink of an eye. Thanks to the gold nugget, the couple were able to purchase their very first home, choosing to live the rest of their lives beside the field that had given them everything.